where the human race began. Nearly 1 billion people live here. And it's a continent with an incredible diversity of communities and cultures. Yet we know less of its history than almost anywhere else on Earth. But that's beginning to change. In the last few decades, researchers and archaeologists have begun to uncover a range of histories as impressive and extraordinary as anywhere else on Earth. It's a history which has been neglected for years, and it's largely without written records. But it is preserved for us in the gold and statues, in the culture, art, and legends of the people. My name is Gus Casely Hayford. Over many years, I've studied the history and culture of Africa. As an art historian, I'm used to drawing stories from mute objects from the past. I'm going to discover the history and find out what really happened to the lost kingdoms of Africa. The Nubians had another greater enemy than the Egyptians: the environment. At the time of Taharqa, around 700 BC, the archaeological records showed that the desert was approaching ever closer, and Kerma itself had lost its grazing land. The pressure of the desert meant that the heartland of the Nubian kingdom now moved further south, another 350 miles along the Nile, around a place called Meroe. Today, the desert here is littered with the remains of pyramids and temples. The society that built them flourished between 700 BC and 400 AD. The rebirth of the Nubian kingdom at Meroe, still green and lush back then, is marked by countless palaces and temples. And although the Egyptians had left their mark on the Nubian culture, there's evidence here also of more ancient Nubian beliefs. I can see the Egyptian influence in the shape of this temple. But the relief sculpture on the walls expressed a decidedly un-Egyptian worldview. By 200 BC, the Egyptian god Horus has been demoted to the back of the line. So this is in a line of seniority?
Exactly.
Even the great Amun of Jebel Barkal is playing second fiddle to the completely non-Egyptian war god Apedemak. He's more senior, shown presenting the sign of kingship to the Nubian ruler. And there's another way the Nubians held on to their traditions from before. Mahmud has brought me to one of the most spectacular sights in Sudan, the royal cemetery itself, where the Nubian kings of this period were buried in their distinctive pyramids. There's evidence of a return to their traditional way of life, where one thing was of the utmost importance.
You can see this line of cattle, two lines, one of on the top, one of the bottom of the wall.
So there's a whole row of cattle,
yes.
Just going from right to left.
And you can see in the iconography itself the scale of the people and the scale of the cows. So they're more concentrating on the cows.
So the thing that they value is obviously cattle.
Exactly.
And the whole of their social world can be translated into value through cattle.
And connected also is cattle as a major part in this life. I think that.
Wow, amazing. So, in a sense, there does seem to be a link between kingship and cattle, something quite fundamental.
Probably yes, because as far as we saw now in here at Meroe and at Kerma, the connection with cattle, and they keep representing cattle in their iconography here in all the thing connected with life and life after death.
700 years after they were subjected to Egyptian domination, the Nubians of Meroe were still a distinct and African culture, a heritage that still connects them to African cultures today. It's time to leave the ruins and head to the inhabited part of Meroe. We're off to the royal city of Meroe, and they've supplied some fantastic transport. Modern Meroe is where Mahmud carries out his main research. His speciality is the history of the iron trade, and many of the old techniques survive unchanged. So for thousands of years, people have been
forging,
smelting, metal.
Using the same technique.
Really? The Nubians are thought to have developed the earliest iron industry in Africa. The first iron technology appeared here during the first millennium BC, around the same time as our own Iron Age.
A number of the archaeologists, they believe that the knowledge of producing iron, it has been invented here in Meroe, and then spread to the rest of Africa. And even some of them, they go further and they call Meroe as the Birmingham of ancient Africa.
The archaeology shows us that Meroe became a relatively large industrial centre, producing vast amounts of iron. For 1,000 years after the loss of the Egyptian kingdom, the Nubians of Meroe flourished. By the 2nd century BC, they'd even developed writing. But whilst archaeologists long ago decoded the sounds of the alphabet, no one has yet cracked the language itself. This was a confident, independent civilization, far from the barbarian wilderness described by the ancient writers, a place that was justly famed for its ironwork, its wrestlers, and its cattle. It's possible that the encroaching desert was their friend as well as their enemy, protecting them from another invasion from the north. But the desert continued its relentless incursion. It had long ago destroyed their civilization at Kerma. Now too, the Nubians of Meroe saw their grazing lands disappearing. This land is just dry and desiccated. Nothing could grow here. But could you imagine actually having invested your livelihood in living here as a farmer, just to see it all turn to dust? And you can imagine the people thinking this was just obviously something which might have been seasonal, perhaps a few dry summers or winters, and then it just lasted forever, changed the culture, changed the landscape, and eventually the people would have had to have given up. With the desert came one of the few animals to thrive in its conditions, the camel. They were first domesticated in Arabia about 1000 BC and took some time to reach Nubia. When they did, they eventually brought a nomadic way of life to the Eastern Sahara, and everything changed.
By the end of the 4th century AD, the nomads around, or the tribe around Meroe, they start to control the trade routes, making problem for the Meroitic state.
Mahmud believes it was the loss of its trade routes to camel-riding nomads which destroyed the Nubian kingdom at Meroe. Others debate this, but by 400 AD, archaeologists agree the ancient kingdom of Nubia was in terminal decline. The Nubian way of life had become impossible, but what became of the Nubian people? We're on our way south, and we're suddenly confronted by the new kings of the desert. It's an enormous camel train on its way, it seems, to the great camel markets of southern Egypt. some of the guys who are on these trains, that they have fairly sort of dicey reputations. We're going to be okay, are we?
Yes, hopefully we should be okay. We will be very careful when we approach. As you said, there have been some problems.
There's someone under that tree there. When we meet up with the camel herders, we're given a friendly greeting. These men have travelled all the way from Darfur, near the border with Chad. They've covered more than 700 miles and have hundreds more to go. This is the way of life that now dominates the desert, where once the Nubians ruled. Their days are spent guiding their camels from well to well, from oasis to oasis, but they don't seem to think it's any hardship.
They said they're enjoying very much their trip, and they don't feel like it's very difficult or tough or something. They're enjoying the camels the same as the way we are enjoying these fancy cars.
These men will travel 40 days at a time, 10 kilometers a day, and rest when the sun is highest in the sky. But there are still small communities here, people who eke out a living off this harsh land. They too are dependent on the camel. Are we close now?
Yes, we are almost there.
We're almost.
Turn right from here.
I wonder if these people are among the descendants of the original Nubians. But where once their ancestors lived lives defined by lush grazing land, these people must cluster around small wells. I can do the pulling, but there's something quite sophisticated going on with the wrists, which I think is probably avoiding it being tangled in this thing. Oh! What's that actually? Oh, and this is your well. It's a sharp contrast to the pastoral way of life which once thrived here. And getting thirsty animals watered is laborious work. Wow. I imagine it's going to take about 10 of these to make any real decent sort of attempt on this. I imagine we've probably got our work cut out for the evening with this. This is a culture perfectly honed to the desert, but it isn't Nubian. To see if there are any traces of the old Nubian civilization, I'm going to have to head out of these desert zones further south.